Welcome to the Bachelor of Performing Arts Foundation course in Kathak. I'm sure all of you will learn Kathak dance very seriously and will blossom into beautiful artists. But in learning Kathak, it is not enough just to learn the practical part. You also have to know about the theory. You have to know about the history and development as well as the aesthetics of Kathak. So we will begin with the origin and history of Kathak. Katha means a story, a narrative, and Kathak, the storyteller or the narrator. In Sanskrit lexicons such as the Shabdartha Chintamani or the Shabdakalpa Drumakosh, we have references to Kathaks. It is said that Kathaks are they who narrate stories. Again, they are referred to as solo performers, and sometimes they are also referred to as preachers. In Jain lexicons, we also have references to Kuhagas, who narrate and preach. Even in Pali and Nepalese dictionaries, we have Kathikas, who preach while performing. In fact, the role of the Kathak was simultaneously that of a storyteller, an entertainer, and a preacher. They told stories in an entertaining way by bringing in songs, dances, and drama within the story. And in the process of the story, they also preached certain moral concepts. Literary texts are full of references to these Kathaks, who are also referred to variously as Kathapranas and Granthikas. In the Ramayana and Mahabharata, we have references to wandering minstrels or storytellers. In fact, Ram's two sons, Love and Kush, were very adept in this art form. Patanjali, in his Mahabhashya, also refers to Granthikas, who preached while performing and enacting stories. Again, we have references to the Kathaks in Bharat's Natya Shastra and Sarangadev's Sangeet Ratnakar. Everywhere we have references to these wandering minstrels who in ancient India performed, entertained, preached and told stories. In fact, in those days when books were rare and very few people could read, it was these Kathakas who kept alive the tradition of our country by telling stories, by teaching certain moral ideas. And that is why ancient India was highly educated in our history, in our mythology, and they had very high moral concepts. Now, these Kathaks formed a very important part of the social organization. In fact, they generally belonged to families of Brahmin priests, and the tradition and the technique of telling stories was handed down from generation to generation, the father teaching the son, and so on. In fact, the Kathaks almost formed a class or a caste within the social order. Now, the journey of Kathak began with these storytellers, and over centuries, because of the various social and religious changes that have taken place in our country, the dance form gradually evolved, developed, and finally crystallized into the modern day Kathak dance as we see it today. Although in the beginning Kathak was the art of storytelling, but gradually the movements became more and more stylized, and it was more of dance or a dance style rather than just storytelling. Usually the dancers were connected with the temple. They performed in the temple courtyard after the prayers were over, and sometimes on special occasions when there were ceremonies or ceremonial worship in courts of kings, the Kathaks performed religious stories there too. If we look at the temple structure of whatever temples there is remaining in North India, we will see that the dance portrayed in the sculpture is not very different from the portrayals of dance we see in southern India or other parts of India. In fact, we have the knee bent position, but if we look at Kathak today, we will see that the dancers stand erect. Again, pirouettes, which are so important in Kathak today, are not there, or even the hint of it is not there in the temple sculptures. So it is obvious that some major change took place in the dance style, for which reason the technique has become so different from the other dance styles of India. If we look at the miniature paintings of the Middle Ages, we will see that these paintings reflect the dance which is performed today. If we look into history, we will see that from the 11th century onwards, there were constant raids by Central Asian warriors, and these raids were mostly in the area in which Kathak was or still is performed, that is, along the Indo-Gangetic Valley. Now, these warriors in the beginning were just interested in plundering the country, but later, gradually, Islamic rule was founded in India. The raiders came and destroyed the temples. Then, when the Islamic rulers began to rule India, both of the Delhi Sultanate and later of the Mughals, they wanted to identify with the country, because they felt that even though they had the country within their power, they were looked on as foreigners. And so, in an attempt to identify with the country, they started patronizing the art forms of the country. Now, these rulers had brought with them a host of people, including entertainers, musicians, and dancers. Now, in India, with the Hindu tradition, dance was a part of worship. But with the Islamic rulers, it was just mere entertainment. But during the Sultanate and during the Mughal rule, the dancers who had come from Central Asia intermingled with the indigenous Kathak artists, each influencing the other. The very fast pirouettes, the fast footwork, the upright stance of Central Asian dancers was absorbed by the Indian dancers. Again, the Indian dancers, with their emphasis on facial expression and various gesture language of the body, influenced the Central Asian dancers. In fact, during Jahangir's rule, historical texts refer to two separate classes of dancers, those who had come from Central Asia and those who were of Indian origin. Even as early as the 13th century, we see that the Islamic rulers were endeavoring to identify with the Indian musical tradition, and they were also trying to popularize it amongst the people. Alauddin Khilji, who ruled from 1296 to 1316, commissioned Naik Gopal to translate the Sanskrit Dhrupads into the common language so that people could follow and sing all these beautiful Dhrupads. The Persian and the Indian music and dance traditions were being crystallized, and a new style called the Hindustani classical style was evolving. In fact, we know that by the time of Amir Khusru, which is the late 13th and early 14th centuries, the two traditions of music had started influencing each other and had started becoming crystallized into the Hindustani classical tradition. In dance too, as in the case of music, we see the fusion of both the art forms, the indigenous Indian and the Central Asian influence. In the Muslim darbars or royal courts, the focus of dance shifted from the religious to the aesthetic, with greater emphasis on rhythmic content and virtuosity. Again, since Abhinaya was now concentrated more on human emotions rather than on the portrayal of religious stories, Abhinaya became very subtle and evocative, and a great deal of emphasis was placed on different ways of expressing the same idea. Beauty, symbolism, and nuances were more important than on portraying a mythological story. In the royal courts of the great Mughals, Kathak blossomed into a very refined and sophisticated dance form as a result of the fusion of Hindu and Islamic principles as well as the fusion of Indian and Central Asian influences. In fact, of all the South Asian dance forms, it is Kathak which is very greatly influenced by and imbued with the principles of Islamic culture. The great Mughals, Akbar, Jahangir, and Shah Jahan, who ruled from the mid 16th to the mid 17th century. Well, all these emperors, with their refined tastes, gave a lot of encouragement and patronage to the music and dance forms. In Abul Fazl's Ain-e-Akbari and in other books on social history written at that time, we have detailed descriptions of the wonderful dance and music presentations that used to take place in Delhi and also throughout the kingdom. Abul Fazl says that there were performances in the courts of the emperor, and again various ministers, businessmen, and men who were rich and powerful also held performances of dance and music in their own houses, and dance and music receiving such encouragement and patronage naturally blossomed and crystallized into a beautiful art form. While the Indian dancers belonged to a special social order and they were imbued in the religious tradition, the Central Asian dancers were mostly slave girls who were mere entertainers, and usually they had no social standing. They were beautiful dancers who were often taken advantage of by their patrons. In time, they came to be known as Baijis, and usually their daughters also followed the tradition. And so began to develop two types of dancers: the traditional Kathak dancers who belonged to the Brahmin caste, and these Baijis who were basically of foreign origin. Nevertheless, both of them have contributed a great deal to the development of Kathak, and we should respect artists of both the tradition. Aurangzeb, as we all know, abhorred all the art forms, and dance was a taboo. But Muhammad Shah, who belonged to the 18th century, was very fond of the arts. In fact, he was known as Rangile Pia, or one who loved the arts. And during his time too, the dance, music, and other art forms received a great deal of royal patronage. But by the 18th century, and obviously after that, the Mughal Empire was gradually becoming weak and disintegrating. This was the time when various regional rulers began to gain in political and economic power. From the 18th century onwards, we see that it is these regional princes and rulers who are patronizing the various art forms, including the art of dance. And so from this time, we come to the various provinces with their rulers, their artists, their dancers. In the previous part, we had been discussing the evolution of Kathak, and we had come to the Mughal court, where the Islamic and Hindu traditions were influencing Kathak. And we had also said that the next major stage in the development of Kathak was when, with the weakening of the Mughal Empire and the gradual rise of the provincial rulers, it was these rulers who started patronizing the Kathak art form. Now, before going on to this stage, we must bear in mind that Kathak was not only performed in the royal courts or in the capital city. There were a number of Kathak artists who performed outside the court, who lived in villages and performed in the village temples and in get-togethers. Now, during the Middle Ages, there was a major change within Hinduism. This was the cult of Vaishnavism. Whereas the earlier Brahminical Hinduism concentrated on ritualistic worship, the Vaishnavites preached on love of God. They imagined God as someone very close to us, someone with whom we could identify ourselves. The Vaishnavite cult became very popular throughout India, and its influence was felt in all art forms, starting from literature, music, dance. In fact, it was felt in all walks of life. And naturally enough, the influence of Vaishnavism was felt in Kathak too. Vaishnavite literature was used as the vehicle for Kathak Abhinaya. And Radha and Krishna became very important persons in Kathak portrayals. Now, coming to the various regional princes, we have three major Kathak styles. In fact, these styles have come down to us today. And two of these were because of the great contribution of two areas. In fact, by contribution of two areas, I mean the rulers of those two areas. One is Awadh or Audh, and the other is Rajasthan. But it is wrong to assume that only the rulers of Awadh or Rajasthan patronized Kathak. In fact, at that time, every important ruler took pride in the fact that they were patronizing the art forms. The rulers of Maharashtra, Bajirao, then of Patiala, and various other regions, Gwalior, Nepal. In fact, throughout northern India, we have all the rulers patronizing the dance forms. In fact, when historical records are found of their reign, emphasis is given to the fact that they had patronized dance and the other art forms. But as you will see in the subsequent lectures, Awadh and Rajasthan, especially Jaipur, contributed a great deal because it was not only the rulers who patronized the dance form, but it was the artists who lived there, who created many new items and who added to the content and repertoire of Kathak, who made these two Kathak styles distinctive and unique. As the importance of Lucknow and Jaipur are very great in the development of Kathak, we will deal with them separately. Now, going on in time, we see that during the British rule, Kathak was not highly regarded by the rulers. In fact, the Britishers did not give any importance to Kathak. They looked down on the artists, whom they called nautch girls or the wives. In fact, dance was referred to as nautch with a derogatory emphasis. And again, dance, which had been considered as a part of education, a part of religion, culture, was not given any respect during the British time. In the early part of the 20th century, when Indians were fighting for their independence and when the nationalistic consciousness was very strong in all Indians, they started reassessing their heritage. And again, in the 20th century, dance began to gain in respect. And of course, after independence, both the government and private sector has given a great deal of patronage and importance to the dance forms. It is taught at universities and other educational institutes, and everyone who learns dance is given a lot of encouragement. And that is why you are here today, to become beautiful dancers. So in this lesson, we learnt of the origin of Kathak, why the dance form is called Kathak, and we learnt of how the dance gradually evolved due to social changes within the country, how it absorbed different religious and cultural influences, how at times it received respect and at times did not receive respect, and how it has come to our age. In the next lesson, we will concentrate on the main styles or gharanas of Kathak, the Lucknow and the Jaipur, and we will also learn of a third gharana, the Banaras Gharana.